Now, before introducing our speaker and panelists, I'd like to thank the Uganda Society of Architects for supporting this event. I'd also like to note that this webinar, as I've just remembered, is being recorded. And in case you encounter any issue, that's for people at home, you can always rewatch it, as well for the people here to consolidate their knowledge on what we're going to discuss today. So before I go into introducing our speaker, I'd like to briefly dive into some background information, the what, why, and when, as well as a brief version of today's agenda. So Localtalks is a series of quarterly events, which means the sessions are normally held every third day of every third week of every third month of the year. So do save those dates. The next one will be in December, in the third week, on the third day. These sessions are meant to bring people together who are interested in and passionate about green design, architecture, and construction in East Africa. So they are curated by Localworks, and for the people who are physically here today, you are at the Localworks office. Localworks is a multidisciplinary design and build collaborative. It comprises of architecture, landscape design, civil and structural engineering, mechanical and electrical engineering, quantity surveying, and project management. And it also specializes in the realization of ecological architecture. Localtalks essentially fulfills the share aspect of the 4 building blocks of Localworks, which are research, design, build, and share. The aim of these talks is to create an open forum for the exchange of ideas, honest debate, and knowledge sharing, as you will witness today. In our first talk, we focused on a topic at a macro level by diving into building with earthbags. And for those who missed it, you can still watch it on the Localworks YouTube channel and listen to it on the various podcast hosting platforms. For this evening's session, we decided to zoom out in order to grasp the concept of green design at a bird's eye view. And after extensively looking through the Kampala Physical Development Plan, as well as the National Physical Development Plan for Uganda, we decided that there's no one better to present these 2 proposals than this gentleman right here, Professor Yigal Tzamir. So today we're so grateful to have you, Professor Yigal Tzamir, all the way in Israel, to speak in more detail about these proposals. We also have 3 panelists who are very competent in the topic of urban design and the social issues surrounding it. We have Mr. Silas Anguzu, who's already here, Dr. Ian Sekantuka, who will be here shortly, and Dr. Richard Irumba. So thank you so much for being here with us. Our panelists will speak for about 5 minutes each after Professor Yigal's presentation. We shall then have a Q&A after that to get the discussion going further. So if you're watching on Zoom, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. If you're on Facebook, leave your questions in the comments. And for those of you who are here with us at the Localworks office, please note your questions down. You'll be given a chance to ask any questions that you have. So thank you so much, Professor Yigal. You can start your presentation.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking to you from Haifa, Israel now. I'll start sharing my presentation. Okay. Okay. For the last 10 years, I am involved in planning in East Africa. I was the team leader of 3 main plans. One is the Kampala Master Plan, and the second one is Uganda Nation Physical Development Plan, and the third one, which has terminated like a month ago, was the National Plan for Rwanda. So from 2010 to 2012, we prepared the Kampala Master Plan. From 16 to 18, the NPDP, the National Planning Development, the National Physical Development Plan of Uganda, and then from 18 to 20, 17 to 80, we were engaged in the National Plan of Rwanda. So my intention in this presentation is to not so much to talk about the content and the details of the plans, but more on the about the framework and about the implementation issues and about the main issues which are common to Kampala, the NPDP plans, and also in Rwanda. I must tell you that the National Plan of Kampala of Uganda initiated with a very nice public communication. The government of Uganda, through the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development, is in the process of preparing the National Physical Development Plan. The meaning of the plan is to carry out social plan and national and international inclusive and sustainable development. For its completion, Uganda will be among the active countries in the National Physical Development Plan. Listening to the information is.
It's very low. The sound is very low.
The sound is low. Okay, it was an announcement in the radio talking about the special planning for inclusive, orderly, and sustainable development of Uganda. We could see that it was mentioned in many places, including in on the streets. You can see here the sign, and they spoke all the time about the notion of let's do it together, and therefore we had along the 2 years 18 regional conferences presenting the data, the ideas, the concept, and consulting with the stakeholders, the main ideas. So the plan was a circling around for 2.5 years, and the action or the operation was terminated in the end of 2018, and since then it was not approved yet by the cabinet. To compare it to what is happening in Rwanda, for instance, we finished the plan and we submitted it in June, and the end of July, the cabinet approved it formally and it became statutory in Rwanda. So the main question is now, what is happening in Uganda in terms of approving the national plan, which was so much communicated, and every minister was involved in like 18 to 20 conferences, including the PM of your country. But this is a question which we can delay to the end, but before that I want to raise some main issues. The main challenge in Uganda, like in many other countries in Africa, is the population growth. Population growth, meaning that according to the UN forecast in Rwanda, we believe today that you are like 41 millions, and the forecast by the UN forecast authorities is that in 2040, you will become a nation of 80, maybe even 81 millions, and in 2050, more than 100 millions. This is a main issue and a main challenge in the country, because this density will raise from like 160 to 335 persons per square kilometers, and during the next 2 years, in 2050, will rise to 400 and more and more and more. And the country is limited in size, as you know. So there has to be a decision-making process saying what will be the population of Uganda in the next 23 years. And we concluded together with the government that we have to plan for 75 millions, assuming that the average annual growth will be 2.75%, and not like today, which is 3.2. which makes the growth completely hysterical. Therefore, we started with trying to find room or to make room for a population of 35 million. 40% of them will be in urban areas and 60% will be in rural areas. Today, you can see in the black here, you can see that 18% only of the total population are urbanized. The others are in rural areas. 82% are still farmers and live in rural areas. And their livelihood comes, of course, from agriculture. Now, if this is the focus for population, the main challenge or the task of the plan, I would say, is to make room for, first of all, for agriculture, secondly, for urbanization and industry. And this can be done in the framework of the entire ecosystem of the country. And we want to defend the ecosystem and defend nature in several places and in many places as much as we can. We have to stop wasting land. And this can be done by, first of all, agglomeration and clustering of settlements and activities. But the main issue is not this. The main issue is that we are pressed, highly pressed by the demands for arable land or for agriculture, for urbanization, settlements areas. And this is going to be coming from grasslands and wetlands. There is no other way to balance the demand for land unless you take part from the grassland and part of the seasonal, maybe seasonal and even some permanent wetlands in the country. Now, if this is the constraints, the main constraints of the whole plan, the risk in the current situation and in the near future, and maybe even more, is the risk of sprawl. Risk of sprawl is I would say, the main problem of the country, because if you look around yourself, you see that people build wherever they want. And you see, for instance, here the Nansana sprawl. You can see here from the a map of a chaotic growth in Nansana, in the north of Kampala. And there is an urgent need for physical planning. And the idea of physical planning, I must say, after so many years of experience in your country, is still not clear enough. What is physical planning? Physical planning is the art of creating all structures. Look at the watch or the clock mechanism here. The function is clear: to create time or to measure time. And in order to measure time, you see that each one of the parts of the particles has a function, has a role. And this is what we have to make while the situation in Uganda, and not only in Uganda, is this. Currently, there is no structure. The setting is disorganized, formless, and chaotic. And therefore, when you look at this, you cannot create function. You cannot create positive activities, or even to arrange the land or to arrange the infrastructure for its purpose. And this is a very problematic issue in your country. You know, structure, instead of agency, means that if agency is the capacity of the individuals to act autonomically, and to make their own free choices, structure is against autonomy. Structure means that individuals are not free agents. They are dictated by social structure and public good. And the problem in Uganda now is that the agency concept of individuals is more is heavier than the public interest. When you compare these two, you see that the private interest is much heavier than the public interest. And this is not balanced enough. And this is coming from one of the notions saying land belongs to the people, which means that people settle where they want. Still, in most places of the country. And when you fly over Uganda and you see the endless sprawl of settlements, agricultural and rural as well as urban or semi-urban, you see that the problem is phenomenal, which means that individualism overcomes public interest. And it has to be changed. What is public interest? First of all, you have to make an orderly, permitted development by law. This is the public interest, first of all, in terms of planning and land uses, and then to enforce it. And the third one is enforcement. And the fourth one is also enforcement, meaning that in order to do development for the public interest, you have to make it enforced by the government everywhere, in every level of planning, every level of implementation. Which means that the mindset and tradition must be changed, of course, by education. What I'm saying again is when you look at this notion, which is sometimes even declared by the president, land belongs to the people, and even the ministers everywhere say the same. Well, the land belongs to people, but if land belongs to people, there is no way to keep or to create the necessary facilities for the public interest. And what I'm saying is crucial for the future of the country. For instance, if you take this into development specifically, you can see that the orderly expansion patterns should be and are everywhere defined by two parameters. First of all, the boundaries, and then the networks itself within the expansion. If you take, for instance, here the Mbale extension, you can see that without declaring, without defining the boundary of the new development, and without making a clear pattern of networks within the system, the chaos will continue. Now, the same thing is, of course, not only in urbanization, it's also in agriculture, because the main challenges in agriculture, first of all, 80% is still subsistence. The yield is very, very low. The continuous subdivision brings to a situation in which farms are less than 0.8 hectares in average, which is very, very low. And the formless and chaotic land use patterns, as you see in the picture, continue everywhere. So if this is the situation, you cannot create a systematic and economic development of agriculture. You need, the key changes are needed, for instance, big commercial farms, to enlarge the farms, to create new estates, to make it more commercial. And commercial and estates are a matter of organization. Organization and size. Organization and size. Now, of course, the need for orderly designed villages and farms. We have to stop the sprawling system of the tradition. Of course, machinery and technology is very important, but machinery and technology cannot enter without orderly designed villages and farms. It is impossible to put in this chaos machinery like you see here. And of course, one of the most important issues, if not the most one, the bigger one, is the water distribution irrigation system, which are vacant, are not there till now, not in a magnitude which can give us the security for a good or high yields which are necessary. And of course, water comes the agricultural science and innovation and production methods. But without water, nothing. And this current system, spreading water, see here, cannot continue. For instance, things like places like this, that you take water from, the reserves of some mud in different areas is a problem. And the fact that in many places come some, individuals will bring some help to villages by digging for them and by pumping for them water to the center of the village is very minor still. I know this lady has done like this kind of work for 40 or 50 villages, but the number of villages is phenomenal. So you cannot support the whole system on volunteers. Therefore, a system of drainage, of irrigation, moving water from one place to another is necessary. The supply of water in Uganda can be high because you have water. You have a lot of water. You have the aquifers, you have the Nile system, you have all kinds of wetlands, you have a lot of water, but the distribution is minimal. For instance, when I went to Karamoja to see what's going on, I was shocked to see that the drought there brought people to hunger and they didn't have even water to drink. They drank blood from the cows. And this was, and the whole distance is like 5 hours drive from Kampala to Karamoja. So the main issue of infrastructure to bring water to different places of the country and to subdivide it into, areas which can be developed from the point of agriculture by putting in the necessary water systems is crucial. Now about urbanization, and we are talking now about urbanization in Uganda itself, the prime city syndrome, which makes the whole hierarchy of cities dependent on a giant and all the others are gnomes, cannot be continued. It's known now from the literature and from many research projects that we need a system which is hierarchical. So Kampala can be the bigger one, but there should be others which are big enough in the periphery, in other regions, in order to create a distribution of resources, contribution of investments in the country. So if the country of 200K square kilometers and 80,000 million people in 2040 cannot be supported by one big city like Kampala. It is not economical, so the agglomeration of activities into the regional cities is important. Therefore, we developed different structures, alternative structures, and the one which is called option one, and you can see it on the left, was denied completely. And we created instead of that an option number two, which said, okay, Kampala is the bigger one, but there are others, main cities which should be in the act as a poles of economy and development and big enough to grow in the region itself. Which means that we created a hierarchy of like 6 levels in the hierarchy from the capital to townships of between 50 to 100K. And we spread it in a map according to the potentials, according to the trends, and according to the potentials from the economical point of view in different places. One of the issues was Kampala, and let us jump to Kampala. You see, Kampala, even in like 10 years ago and 8 years ago, started a tsunami of sprawl, a tsunami of growth uncontrolled, not formal, all over, and you see what can happen within a few years if this kind of tendency continues. You can see the red sprawling all around in this orange patch of distribution. And the urban areas cannot be sprawling anymore. Therefore, the main contribution to the concept of future Kampala was, first of all, to limit the amount of GKMA to 8 million, the whole system around Kampala, and the KCCA itself to 3.8 million, not more than that. The way to do it is not by limiting the growth of the city itself, but by presenting alternative cities for growth, like we said before. So it's not a matter of pull factors, it's a push and the pull factors together, and therefore the idea of limiting the numbers of population in KCCA is conditioned by the development of other cities. So we had a list of cities and we said to the government, okay, start developing and investing in the periphery. As a matter of fact, I don't know if they started, because I know from the government itself that they are going to go into tenders of planning of like 7 cities, but it takes time because they could have been done it like 2 years ago. And I hope that they will start planning it now. The planning itself takes like 2 or 3 years. So time is money, time is life. Therefore, we have to hurry in order to create the pull factors in the regions. Now, what we suggested for Kampala itself is to create or to adopt the concept of what we call satellites, a metropolis of satellites. And then we have the existing one like Wakiso, Mukuno, Entebbe, the KCCA itself, but we suggested new satellites for the metropolis. One is in the area of Sisa, and the other one is in the area of Nakisunga and Netejero. We analyzed the entire potentials of the lands in Uganda around Kampala, and we identified these places, and everyone was happy. But nothing has been done since then. Nothing has been done since then, and the sprawling process in Kampala continues, according to what I know today. By the way, the system of road, which was very, very important in terms of the growth patterns, was a belt and radial networks, like you have in Moscow, for instance. And as a matter of fact, you started already to do it in the first belt and then in the second one. And it's going to be very, very rational in terms of the how to develop the system. I am not going to go into it because it's very complicated. It's full of details. It's not time for today. Now, transportation challenges are, the main challenges is the national expressways. I'm not talking about Kampala, I'm talking about the entire country. We need a passenger train. We need airports. We need cargo traffic. And all these was, of course, infrastructure corridors as well. And all of this was analyzed, and we came with a suggestion of what we call the golden triangle of urbanization, with the main roads in between. This is, of course, schematic, but if you can see all the yellow spots here are urbanization patterns in the existing situation, which will grow, of course. Therefore, we decided to suggest to the country, a very simple pattern of a triangle, which can connect all the nodes in the country and to create a system of expressways and trains all over based on the concept of the golden triangle. By the way, this is very nice in terms of understanding later on, in order to clarify, I would say, the scheme, because I think that cognitive map of the development plan should be very clear to everybody, including the normal people from all over. And I'll go into it later on when I'll talk about the logo of the plan of Uganda. Now, green development, everything, by the way, till now is also is a matter of a green approach. Everything which was mentioned till now, but more than that, we made a lot of emphasis in the environmental sustainability issues by two acts. First of all, the first one was to anchor all types of protected areas as statutory entities in the documents of NPDP. The second one was to define new bioregions in the country. And what is bioregion? Bioregion is a sustainable entity including the values of environment as well as economy together. And the main example which I want to give you is this idea of the Nile Kyoja bioregion concept. You can see the blue form with all the body, the body of waters, the water bodies around there. This was defined in the plan as a bioregion, which will be of high level of biodiversity and ecological importance. It will have potential for bioagriculture and ecotourism. It will have a combination of abundance of water and unique rural livelihood, very specific, and what I call human ecology, meaning to meet human demands for food, water, energy, and housing. All those together are parts of the bioregion idea. So, in order to do it, you have to plan this bioregion. You have to keep it. You have to define the boundaries. You have to come out with rules of development and constraints. Answering the question, how do we do these challenges? How would we put them into a proper development? And of course, after we define this internal structure of the bioregion, and if you take into it also the urbanization in yellow and the other brown areas of specified agricultural elements or sites or areas which are the most proper ones for future development, we came out with a structure of the country, including the hierarchy of different towns and different villages, and it can be summarized by a very, very nice scheme. First of all, you have this. Now, what is this? If you look carefully to the blue spot of the bioregion of the Nile system, what you can see is that beyond the triangle, you have something which is what we call the springbok, the national bird, which is the blue crane. Look, can you see the blue crane in the Nile? Compare, you see the legs here, you see the body, you see the neck, you see the head, you see the eye. So you got here a springbok, a blue crane in the country itself. It's not only simple in the flag, it's in the country itself. And this was a kind of a new idea which people identified, and therefore we have a logo. We have a logo of NPDP. The logo is the symbol of the golden triangle and the springbok as the Nile biodiversity area. And if you add to this, by the way, the triangle is not only roads, it's infrastructure and urbanization. One here, one here, one here. Well, so this is the logo of the plan, but I want to speak shortly about implementation. Without implementation, nothing has no value, of course. And the implementation process should be part of the plan, and it is part of the plan. by telling everybody, the government of course, that the implementation prerequisites or requisites is first of all hierarchical planning. You start with national, you continue with regional, and then you continue with local. Planning in each one of the levels. Orderly planned, national plan, regional plans, all the regions, and the local plans, of course, for urbanization, rural areas, etc. The second thing is the hierarchy. By the way, if you look at the elements of the planning, you can look at this scheme and see that Vision 2040 come first, then the NPDP 2040, then the region plans, sectoral master plans for different sectors like agriculture, tourism, etc. Local land development plans, urban development plans, and all the other implementation and to structuring the sites themselves. The second issue is follow the rule of ISC. We call it ISC because ISC is interdependency, simultaneity, and compliance. No more segregated planning, because when you look at acts of planning all over, you see what we call sometimes disjointed incrementalism, which means that you plan here and there, plans are not independent, they are interdependent, they are not interdependent, sorry. They are not done simultaneously, so things are not compliant to each other. So if you keep in mind that interdependency, simultaneity, and compliance are needed, then you create real planning for the country. The act of planning is crucial, of course. Now, the third thing in implementation is, of course, as we started, the political and economic ability to carry out acquisition and expropriation. There is no country in the world which developed itself to a proper level without these acts of acquisition expropriation. Otherwise, no roads, otherwise no schools, no sites for infrastructure, and this is a problem. So the idea of carrying out by law acquisition, not only by law, but doing it concretely in each part of the country while planning and developing is important. But then you come back to the issue of the country, the land belong. How can you breach these differences between acquisition, expropriation, and for the good of the country, for the public good, with the notion of that land belongs to the people. Land belongs to people. You have to pay for it, but people should understand that acquisition and expropriation is not for the government. It's for them for the people themselves. Otherwise, no services at all. And of course, what we say here is, of course, to preserve the land for public users and do it as soon as possible, because infrastructure corridors are important, public services are important, national utilities, and this is going to happen in each one of the levels, not only the national level. Each one of the levels, in one of the districts, of the regions, of the cities, of the towns, should keep in mind that the infrastructure corridors in their setting, the public services for school and other things, national utilities and public housing, all of them are very important right away. And of course, I would say the last main issue is a very important idea of what we call the initiation of pilot projects. It means that all planning and all kinds of projects in every level should be demonstrated by pilot project. You have to make projects in urban, rural, and general, general projects. You have to involve the ministries. You have to cut through and to show to stakeholders the initiatives and the investment needed, and to show that projects can exist. And when you do one, for instance, in tourism or in housing or in agriculture, you can show that things can happen and people can adopt the success from the demonstrative project, from the pilot project, and go on with other projects as well. Thank you very much for this introduction.
Thank you so much, Professor Yigal, for that wonderful presentation.
By the way, my name is Yigal.
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 Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yigal. Yeah, and Iga, you know what Iga means in your language. Iga means knowledge.
Ah, fantastic.
Okay. And the surname is Tzamir. Okay, Yigal Tzamir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. So I hope everyone can hear me. Everyone is on Zoom. Can you please let me know if you can hear me? So we're now going to move on to our panelists. No, but this is on. We are going to move on to our panelists to get their point of view regarding this presentation. Professor, do you mind sharing your screen? I think it's still sharing your screen. So if you stop the screen share. So at the top, you will see a stop share button.
Does anybody know where it is? Green thing. Can you click on the green thing next to his name?
Can you please click on the green thing at the top of your screen
Next to his name.
or next to your name, and so you can stop screen sharing, please?
Yeah. Is your microphone on or is this one?
Yeah.
They cannot hear you online. You need to walk there and talk from there.
Great, thank you.
We're close to the phone, they will not hear you.
They can hear me from here.
They made it known they can't hear you.
Can you hear me? So, thank you, Dr. Richard Irumba, for being here, and Mr. Silas Abuso. So I'm going to start with Dr. Richard as a representative of the KCCA, we would like to know what happened in the process of implementing these plans, especially regarding the Kampala Physical Development Plan.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, members, both who are online and those who are physically present here. Sarah, I was suggesting that before I answer the specific questions, I could supplement the presentation which has been made by Professor Yigal, Professor Knowledge. I will supplement on in two areas. One, the Kampala Physical Development Plan, also containing aspects of the Kampala Physical Development Framework. And then I also give some brief highlights on the Green Infrastructure Ordinance as some of the planning frameworks we are following in the city. The Kampala Physical Development Plan, Professor has given the bigger picture of the plan, but as the theme of the day, I will give some brief highlights on particularly the environmental issues. I have a long history in teaching. Probably Sarah, you remind me, especially in terms of time, but I will try to summarize. The Kampala Physical Development Plan, some specifics. The population target was 5.8 million during the implementation period that was from 2012 to 2022. The target in terms of built area growth was from 355 square kilometers to 485 square kilometers in 2022, representing a growth of about 37%. Then also in terms of the targets for this plan was to maintain over half of the extended Greater Kampala metropolitan area land mass as natural. So that was the plan, that about half of the area should be maintained as natural. Then the densities, in order to accommodate the population which the professor talked about, the concept was the densification of the built up areas, and that the new developments that would come up would meet the density requirements which are spelled out in the plan. Housing is a big challenge in the city because of the fast growing population. So the plan was looking at increasing the residential units from 800,000 to about 1.5 by 2022, and the residential unit from 50 unit size on average from 55 to 70 square meters. Now, the environmental issues, focusing on the theme for today's talk, the Kampala Physical Development Plan focused on provision of piped sewage system and improving the groundwater quality. And during this period, two major projects have been implemented. One focusing on sewage, that's the Nakivubo Kinawataka sewer mine, which covered more than 10 kilometers in terms of linear coverage. And in terms of water supply, presently KCCA is partnering with the National Water and Sewerage Corporation to implement the Katosi Kampala water transmission mine as a backup to the Gava Waterworks, which supplies the greater Kampala metropolitan area. And the philosophy and thinking here, both in terms of theory, is that establishing a functional water and sewage system is the first key to building a sustainable city. In terms of wetlands, the Kampala Physical Development Plan focuses on rehabilitation of degraded wetlands as public open spaces and or sports facilities. It also focuses on conserving the natural wetlands. And it also focuses on demarcation of wetland boundaries. And at the moment, we have the wetland atlases available, the national wetland atlases available, not only focusing on Kampala or the greater Kampala metropolitan area, but even going beyond. Government has done physical demarcations of some wetlands, not all of them, but some wetlands have physically been demarcated. And a number of land titles which were created within wetlands are due for conservation. Then the other strategy of conserving and protecting wetlands was effective development control. And this is part of the mandate of KCCA. And the development control for wetlands, on one part, is through not granting approval of plans which are falling within wetlands. And secondly, not to provide services, water, electricity, etc. In wetland areas. So that's part of development control. And then lastly, regarding the environmental issues within the Kampala Physical Development Plan, we have managing the extreme climatic events. And as you are all aware, flooding is a big challenge in the greater Kampala metropolitan area. And some of the interventions we have made in order to manage flooding. One is developing a drainage master plan for the greater Kampala metropolitan area. Secondly, we have developed flood risk maps for the city. These are very important tools in terms of planning developments in the city, such that you can be able to assess the level of risk posed to the project you are putting up. And also in terms of drainage master plan implementation, we have some low-hanging fruits, which amongst others include the ongoing works, improvement works for Rubigi primary drain and the Nakamero secondary drain, both of them which are located in Kampala North. Then the other developments regarding master planning in the city, we're quite aware that plans are not cast in stone, plans change. The Kampala Physical Development Plan was developed in 2012. A number of things have changed. So we have come up with a program of updating the Kampala Physical Development Plan with funding by JICA. And the bigger project, this is one of the activities, but the bigger project is on developing an integrated master plan for the greater Kampala region. Then the second part, in terms of highlights, is focusing on the green infrastructure ordinance. So as KCCA, we have developed a green infrastructure ordinance, largely aimed at managing and controlling the green infrastructure. And the green infrastructure we're talking about here, we are talking about trees, we are talking about vegetation, we are talking about green roofs, public and private gardens, parks, woodlots, wetlands, urban forests, agricultural land, etc. So all those different elements I'm talking about constitute what we define as the green infrastructure in this ordinance. The Green Infrastructure Ordinance is a very good document. It's due for approval by the Kampala Capital City Authority, the political wing. It's actually on the agenda for tomorrow, tomorrow's meeting. So we expect that by the end of tomorrow, it will become a legal document. But it's addressing a number of issues, including the management of public open spaces, both the current ones and the new ones which will be created, private open spaces, private spaces in terms of plots of land, both developed and vacant, parking slots, okay, parking lots. How do you plan for green infrastructure when you are designing parking lots, management of wetland areas. Advertising has become a challenge. There are many upcoming, advertising boards scattered all over the city, which have a number of issues in terms of city management, management of trees, and a number of other areas contained in the ordinance. So lastly, I want to give some bit of detail in terms of private space management for various practitioners regarding developments in residential areas. The ordinance provides for the open green space plot coverage of a minimum of 40% of a plot. So 40% of a residential plot is expected once this comes into it, becomes a law. Okay? So 40% of a residential plot is expected to be covered by green infrastructure. Then tree coverage, where I think for residential areas, we're talking about a minimum of 1 tree for every 80 square meters. In commercial areas, we are talking about green space plot coverage of 10% of the plot. And in terms of tree coverage, we're talking about a minimum of 1 tree for every 15 square meters. So this is very important information for designers and planners. And then for mixed use development, we have not set standards per se, but the standards we shall follow will depend upon the predominant use in the immediate neighborhood. And then in terms of industrial development, for light industries, we're talking about open green space coverage of 20% and tree coverage of a minimum of 7 trees per acre. And lastly, for medium and heavy industries, we're talking about green space coverage, minimum of 35%, and the tree coverage of a minimum of 13 trees per every acre of development. So those are some of the highlights I had prepared to supplement what the professor presented. So you had some specific question you wanted to bring?
Yes, well, in comparison with what I'm hearing is that you now have a new plan underway. So what caused this plan to halt, right, in order for you to come up with new ideas?
This plan is actually not on hold per se. The plan is still running. But what we're recognizing is that between 2013 and 2020 now, a number of things have changed. And the plan needs to be revised. So the plan is still operational, running up to 2022, but this project is meant to update the plan to cover certain issues which have changed over time.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Silas, do you have anything else to add on to that? Any views?
Thank you very much. I have a few points that I want to make. First of all, I'm an urban planner, and generally the profession of urban planning in Uganda is, I still consider it in its infancy. I was in the second lot of urban planners trained at Makerere University, and this course was suggested as a solution to the problems of planning that we're experiencing. Consider also the fact that we have been facing civil war for a very long time. Since 1971, I think there have been no concrete, I was not yet there by that time, but we have not had any coherent planning going on because there was regime change after regime change. So from 1986 is when we had some, stability in government. And so in 2001, 1997 is when the first courses, the first batch of students were started off the course. So from that, you can appreciate that the profession of planning in Kampala, in Uganda, and I dare critique the profession, that we do not have character yet. We haven't got an identity. And we are roaming without purpose, being driven by the winds of political change and tossed about left, right, and center. We have failed to appreciate our role, our central role in determining and guiding development. But this also we must consider, why are we doing the development? It is for the people. Which brings me to the second point, that there is a clear dichotomy in the population of Uganda, which was clearly demonstrated by Professor Mahmoud Mamdani in his book, Citizens and Subjects, where he showed that there were natives and there was the elites, and they have different laws guiding them. And from Professor Yigal's presentation, you are able to see that 80% of Ugandan citizens still stay in the rural areas. I'm sure most of you have gone 20, 30 kilometers outside Kampala, and you understand what it means to stay in a rural area. Many people say it's good, there's no pollution, but I've lived on the farm. Just getting a jerrycan of drinking water, we had to cycle about 2 kilometers away. So according to me, that is hell on earth. And the fact that we're accepting 80% of our population to live under such circumstances is telling as to why we are failing to implement these wonderful plans that we're coming up with. As a matter of fact, Uganda has one of the best laws in every area. Human rights, mention it. But go to Kawempe police station and see how a police cell looks like. Appreciate it. You will throw up. Because there are two categories of people. Now, the 20% who are living in the urban areas, again, 67% of those are living in slums. I'm staying in Boise. It's normal. It's normal. That Lubiji, it is sewage, raw sewage flowing. And the smell flies, goes all over the place. Half of the houses in Boise 1 are submerged. In Boise, they say, etakazikula. Either the houses have sunk or the ground has risen. But I suspect the ground is rising because of silt coming from the regular flooding. I have a lot of videos, but we don't know what to do with those videos anymore. We just keep them in our archives. Point number 3. After appreciating the demographics that I've just highlighted, you need to look at the scale of the problem we're facing, the scale. Do we approach this matter piecemeal? For example, the Lubiji channel. 3 weeks ago, I think, the president came and launched it. After cries of 10 years, 20 years. I had just finished my university. I was one of the people who worked on the Northern Bypass. But up to today, and that Northern Bypass has caused the flooding that is in Boise because it played around with the water flow. It has caused flooding in the whole of Boise for the last 20 years. And it is only after 20 years that a solution has finally come in the rehabilitation of the waterway, which I don't think is the solution. The scale of the problem needs to be appreciated. I don't want to say too much without first of all solving the first problem, which is the dichotomy that I mentioned. Until we begin to see every Ugandan as a Ugandan citizen, we're clearly wasting our time. Totally waste of time. And I'm an urban planner. I've not yet worked in government. I've been in private practice. Also unemployed. Because my views don't augur well with what government wants. But we're saying we have to come back to the drawing board. We cannot approach the matters the way we have always approached them. So when we talk about housing, for example, national housing built 4,000 houses from 1962 up to 1971. The NRM government, under the NRM government, they have built 1,800 apartments. And these 1,800 apartments, each is going for about, the cheapest is about 180 million. 250 million, who can afford that? So no low-cost housing. So when we're talking about scale, we're talking about houses which a border can afford. But as long as we continue ignoring the 67% of the people living in the urban areas, we're wasting our time. So coming back to Professor's last point, where we need to have a coherent, the plan has to be implemented at the same time. You cannot just implement drainage and then you come and implement green spaces and put regulations, 1 tree per house, 10%. No, we have to go back to the drawing board. After redefining who a Ugandan is, then we begin to state what kinds of conditions he needs to live in, what kind of houses he needs to stay in. Why say we are advocating? The people have given up their land. They want to sell it. We're saying, no, don't sell it. And sharks are waiting with sacks of money trying to buy off the land. The mistake with that is what is happening in Kachanga right now. Without any proper sewage system, without any water, physical facility, without any road network, buildings are coming up, 10 floors. Where are these people going to pass? How is the ambulance going to reach there? I don't know. It is becoming a multi-floor, multi-story slum. To deal with these matters appropriately, we need to go back to the plan that Professor has just outlined. Very beautiful. Raise down the entire Kampala. Raise it down. What is there? What is there? It's a slum. It's a slum. We need to start afresh. Boise has already given up their land. They're saying, please, guys, if you can come. I'm looking for money right now. I've been writing all over Ministry of Finance, please, we need $200 million. The land is there, over 500 acres. The people don't have the money to build. If they're going to build, they're going to build another slum. So we need to take over that planning. So if we're going to look at the 57 different slums that we have in Kampala, then you can appreciate this, the scale we're talking about. That land is prime, it's available, and it is through these kinds of action, compulsory acquisition, expropriation, that we shall put these beautiful plans into action. Mass housing, dense housing, open spaces, parks, and that kind of thing. We can now have the ideas that we really studied at school. But under the current system, I think it's not possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Yigal, we would like to give you a chance to respond to that. We've had those views from our panelists.
About the, do you hear me, please? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I would like to ask the about Kampala. Beyond the efforts to implement infrastructure, sewage, water systems, some measures for sustainable greenery in the city. What happened to the idea of the satellites, which I mentioned? And what has been done in the area of orderly planning of neighborhoods, including the city center?
I think Dr. Richard, you'd be the best person to answer that question.
Should I answer immediately or?
Just give us 1 minute.
Thank you, Professor Yigal. It is true when you studied the Kampala Physical Development Plan, it divided the Greater Kampala metropolitan area into 29 precinct areas. And the recommendations were quite clear that we need to develop detailed neighborhood plans for those areas. What we have so far achieved may look meager, but it is something. With the support from the European Union, we're in the final stages of concluding the neighborhood plans for precinct areas, including Kololo, Nakasero, Mulago, and Makere. So those are about 4 precincts out of the 29 which were recommended. So it's a slow pace, but I could say the biggest challenge we have is that planning is one thing and implementation is another. You come up with a beautiful plan, the resources required to implement that plan are huge. And sometimes the assumptions made at the stage of planning in terms of resource mobilization, okay, do not actually work out the way how they are expected. So because of inadequate financial resources, we have only been able to come up with detailed plans for precincts. And with this funding coming in and support coming in through JICA, we are going to pilot 2 other areas in terms of detailed planning. One area will be picked, will be selected from where the area under the jurisdiction of Kampala City, and the other one will be selected from areas outside the Kampala City. So that's what has been, what we have achieved during this period.
I hope that's satisfactory, Professor Yigal. I would just like to actually convey my apologies on behalf of Dr. Ian Sekatuka. He was out of town and he was not able to make it here physically on time. So we'll therefore move on to some of the questions that have been asked here on Zoom. So the first question is from Bernard Achalam, and it's to Professor Tzamir. Would you rather we contain urban growth or we make room for it? How can the urban growth boundaries you noted in your presentation work in practice beyond the idea of developing satellite cities?
The question is not so clear to me. If I understand well, the question was about how to create boundaries for the city or for neighbors in the city. Am I right?
I beg your pardon?
I'm not sure that I understand exactly what was asked. I can guess that the question was about how to create boundaries to specific neighborhoods or to areas under development to prevent the sprawl to the unlimited areas. If this is the question, the answer is very simple. I think that each
in practice, the satellite cities in practice.
You see, the initiation of a city, of a satellite city, should be done either by investors who own the land or can buy land under the guidance of the government and the city. I think that to create a new satellite is a very important thing, very important. It can be a demonstration of how to make what we call a new city, a new Kampala, orderly planned with high values of architecture and environment. And I'm curious why at the first when each one of the the leaders saw the plans, they were astonished, excited. They said, well, this is a good idea. So I didn't follow the efforts along the years, but I'm not sure that enough was done in order to support the idea, in order to initiate it, in order to bring seed money to those areas and to create those at least one of those two satellites. I think this cannot be done spontaneously. It cannot be done by a few people who are interested. It is such a big move that the idea should be led by the country, the government, in participation with the city itself.
Fantastic. I'll just move on to another question from Sheila Nyosamba. So she says that you spoke about developing orderly structures, which I think is something that you've touched on in your answer as well. But her question is that both in regards to physical planning and agriculture, with the development of these master plans, was the contextual setting of the people being planned for taken into consideration? Because sometimes implementation may fail due to imposing new and foreign systems that conflict with people's cultural and societal ways of life. How do we achieve inclusive design without involving the residents of these different areas?
I'll give you an example about the rural areas and the idea of consolidating villages into modern village or villages or even townships. It's a matter of incentives. When you show people that you can, by moving them from one place to another and agglomerating the farms into big ones, you can show simply that their salaries or their livelihood could be changed dramatically to a better one. Instead of showing it, you have to make a pilot project of implementation by investing in a specific place. So the change of the structure of agriculture and the villages, which are spread all over, is by showing a place which can be changed totally And it's like, you know, you start a movement by a leadership act. And then people say, hey, it's very nice. We can gain a lot if we participate together. So it's not a matter of talking, it's a matter of doing. It's a matter of concentrating in a demonstrative plan, in a pilot plan, showing everybody that these ideas are applicable.
Silas, I'd also like to hear your opinion on this. And what you think about this idea. Do you think that the plans are failing due to imposing new and boring systems on our culture?
Actually, that, for lack of words, maybe, can I call that an excuse that people use to keep people in grass-thatched houses and flooded homes? Everybody wants an apartment with a flat screen TV. Everybody wants hot water. Everybody wants an indoor toilet and bathroom, but they cannot afford it. Now, the government is in a very good position to implement these programs, but it requires a certain level of ingenuity, because you're not just going to bring Rocco to come and construct in Boise. An apartment will come out at 500 million. And there are such apartments I've seen in Kampala here going for 600 million. We have to be clever about this. Look at the income levels of these people. How much money can they afford for a mortgage? If you're going to build apartments which are going to be paid for in 10 years, how much can they afford? Maybe 300,000 tops. So I think the government, the planning authority, the implementation authority need to think outside the border. Kind of and look at, first of all, look at these people as people, and then find ways of implementing this. I can tell you, if you talk to an architect right now, they will tell you a square meter of flat is 750,000 square meter. So if you calculate a small 2-bedroom apartment, we're getting 30 million shillings for an apartment, to 35 million, to 40 million tops. Why is it that we're not able to do this? It is you who can do it, because you have the power. You can reach the minister's office. You can reach the president's office. But the most important thing is the people on the ground. They want these services. They need them. How do you lead the development process? How do you bring these services to the ground? How can you start planning for Boise? For example, I told you 57 slums are existing in Kampala. This is the biggest opportunity for redevelopment we have, because they are very easy to buy out. Very easy. Easier getting land in the slums than in Ntinda, where each house can go for 500 million. In the slums, it's much less. So I think, yeah, it's about scaling, scale to understand how we can approach the problem. Yeah.
Dr. Richard, any feedback?
On
what he just said?
Yes, it is. Inclusive planning is quite important. The traditions of planning we are following are borrowed from models of planning in developed countries. So probably there is a point which the person Sheila actually raising, that it's not always correct that the planning approaches we follow should be borrowed from the West. We need to try as much as possible to incorporate our cultures, even when we talk about housing. Okay? We can borrow the designs and and schemes which have worked in other countries. But it would be important, even in terms of construction materials, in terms of design and everything, also incorporate the local cultural practices. So she has a very valid point. Where I can't tell with certainty is the extent to which this bias is affecting the implementation process of the plans we're having. But certainly, it's a valid argument which we need to put into consideration.
So we have a question from the audience.
Thank you. My name is Felix. I have one question for Professor Tzamir and two questions for Dr. Irumba. On a national scale, Professor Yigal, I found it very interesting how you have explained your plan. One key aspect, obviously, is letting other cities grow in a controlled way rather than only Kampala. I'd be interested to hear more about that in the sense of how do you actually make other cities attractive? You made an interesting point to say it is not about limiting growth of one thing, it is rather making other places more attractive. Now, obviously, attractive means creating livelihoods, creating industrialization, creating economic growth. I'd be very interested to hear more about how one typical pilot project could look like. You know, which town could be selected, and what would need to be done in order to make this vision work. And to Dr. Irumba, my two questions are: you mentioned that the KDP-PD from 2012 needs updating, and works apparently are ongoing to update this. I would love to hear why. You said things have changed. I would like to hear 1, 2, 3 examples of what has changed that made the plan from 2012 already in such a short time to basically have to be updated. It seems an awful short time to me. And the other comment I would like to hear from you is on a topic that you haven't mentioned with one word, and that is mass transit, mass transport. We all know that Kampala is choking because of the lack of mass transit. And we know that the Kampala Physical Plan includes the ideas of a bus rapid transit system. And we know that there were some ideas of cable cars and stuff like that. We know that there is a design for a BIT system, and nothing is being done whatsoever in even implementing a pilot project. Why? So maybe starting with Professor Tzamir.
Thank you very much. You are asking what is the way? Well, what is the methodology? What is the process by which you create a growth pool in an area which is remoted from the capital? Everything starts with economy. And you have to, every time when you decide on such a project, you have to put seed money from the government. You have to decide what are the advantages or the relative advantages of a specific city or a specific region, and what can be done there. And after you know that, you have the possibility, you have the process. Excuse me, please, for one moment. I'm very sorry because there was a disturbance there. So the whole art of preparing a building, a growth pool in a peripheral city has a lot of methodologies all over the world. It's not a new thing. We don't have enough time to start to find what is the way, but keep in mind that the incentive for creating such a place is always by investing by the government a seed money to start the operation. And then people, instead of going to Kampala, the migration process keeps at a place. People move from, instead of moving to Kampala from the villages, they move from a neighboring villages to the city, which is declared as the growth pole, the new growth pole in a specific region. But you don't have to do it only in one city. You can do it at the same time in different areas at the same time. So it's a matter of the state of mind. It's a matter of how things are happening and what is how do you communicate the stakeholders, the citizens, and how do you drive them into the understanding that the local situation can be improved. The whole idea is to limit the migration processes from all over the country into Kampala by putting initiatives there. I hope I'm clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, that was very clear. Thank you so much. Let's hear from Dr. Richard Irumba.
Thank you. Mass transport. I agree fully with you. One of the biggest challenges we have in the city is traffic jam. And if we continue using the current modes of transportation, we have a very, very, very huge challenge. Even when I was coming here, I was not sure that I would reach here on time. And yet I left the KCCA offices, which are hardly maybe 3 kilometers from here. So I left KCCA offices at around 5:15. But I was able to cover 3 kilometers within about 45 minutes. Now, that's not being effective in terms of movement from one point to another. So certainly, it is an inevitable reality that we need to adapt mass transport systems. What have we done and what are the challenges? One of the schemes we have designed is what we call the bus rapid transport system, the BRT. We developed actually designs more than 7 years ago. We developed designs for the BRT system. But one of the bottlenecks towards rolling out the BRT system is the land acquisition. Because if you are going to create separate lanes for bus movement, it means that you have to acquire additional space beyond the carriageway for vehicles, which we are having at the moment. And because of the history and the culture how we have built in this country, we have ended up with constrained road corridors. So my implication is that if we need additional space in order to implement the BRT system, then we have to acquire the land and pay compensation to all those who are affected. Now the assessment of the costs are too heavy, making the project not cost effective at the moment. What are the other issues, other strategies we're having? We are going to do it in a phased approach. There are corridors where space can easily be acquired. So we're going to proceed to implement it in a phased manner, okay, following certain routes within the city. I may not give you details, but we have specific routes we have selected. We are going to implement it. And we're going to have a pilot project funded by African Development Bank, where we shall acquire, the earlier planning was about 150 buses, but that could be revised as we move towards implementation. And we pilot out the concept of building wider corridors for bus lanes in some parts of the city, and the science of running such a system. It's not only about creating infrastructure, but there are many more issues you need to look at to implement a mass transport system. But we have a bigger plan, what we call the Multimodal Transport Master Plan. And amongst other strategies, we're promoting NMT, non-motorized transport. And we have already piloted, if you have gone through the center of the city, we have already constructed, corridor for non-motorized transport, running all the way from Namirembe up to Entebbe Road, with very good greenery. So I think quite a beautiful piece to look at when you go to the center of the city. Then the second one, which was the first one, why the need to update the Kampala Physical Development Plan in a period of 8 years. I think that's a long period. The unexpected lifespan of this plan were 10 years. So if we are talking about updating after about 8 years, I think it's a mature plan. But to answer your question in terms of specifics, a number of things have changed. As Professor indicated, one of the biggest challenges we have in Uganda, not only Kampala, is the rapid population growth. Some of the projections and estimations which were done at that time are no longer valid at the moment. The reality has turned out to be different. So the population growth has actually grown at a much faster rate than expected, causing a lot of pressure on the resources we had expected to put in place. Infrastructure projects, a number of infrastructure projects have come up which were not earlier anticipated that time. A typical example I could give you is the standard gauge railway project, okay, and the concept of establishing a railway system within the city, okay. Then in terms of administration and the Greater Kampala metropolitan area, you are aware a number of cities have now been created. That was not anticipated at that time, okay, at least in the form it has happened, okay. So that brings in another dimension in terms of planning. You were earlier probably thinking about Entebbe municipality. Now we're talking about Entebbe city with a much bigger area than what was expected at that time of planning. So a number of things have changed. Climatic conditions, I could say the issue of flooding, the scale of flooding we experience now surpasses what we had anticipated at that time. Okay, so a number of things have changed and we need to put all those matters into consideration. And the best way of doing that is to update the planning framework we have at the moment.
May I add something to the previous explanation about the growth poles? One sentence. And the sentence is very simple. Take Hoima as an example. Because of the oil.
Repeat that, we lost you at the beginning.
I'm saying that just to add to my description of the growth pole, I want to give the example of Hoima. This is a good example because of the oil and the future development of industries in this field of oil production, and the airport, which is a very important development catalyzer. Hoima is going to become a big city, and there are a lot of circumstances there and data and a lot of conditions which allow the city, to become a real growth pole. And this is a good example for other places in Uganda too. Thanks.
questions from the audience, please, if you don't mind standing up and coming next to the microphone, that would be great.
Mine is a contribution, but also I'd like to pose a challenge, I think, to practitioners and those who have louder voices than some of us in some far as, yeah. So I will speak as a resident of Kampala for the last 30 years, as a practitioner in the built environment, and also as an employee of the regulators. One of the challenges that we face is that planning tends to be tipped onto one side. And in order for us to say our city works, we'd like it to work in terms of transit, in terms of housing, in terms of services, in terms of health, the air that you breathe in, trees and green spaces. And right now the heart is, when it's an engineer at the round table, he will lobby for his roads to get done in that area. And therefore, at that time tip, the scales will be tipped towards the focus on roads and transit. When it's an architect who might be at the table, he may tip it towards the need for housing. Let's have maybe 10-story buildings, 20-story buildings, get more people crammed up into one space. If it's a water engineer, he might have it tipped towards the fact that get more pipes into that place. And we need to get to that point where we think about things holistically. Just as Silas suggested, when you look at Boise, it's not enough to get Lubiji cleaned out, but what is going to happen when the over 1,000 people there still do not have toilets to go to? You're going to end up with, you know, sort of some steps that you'll have to repeat all over again. So I think it's a challenge for all of us to, and also Professor Yigal, who seems to have good experience. Also, you seem to have a voice with some of these authorities in the plans that we're doing. And incidentally, you pick out on Hoima. I think if you went into Hoima, yes, the airport is being done. Yes, the roads are being done. But what happens to the other things that need to be put in place for a city to work? Dr. Irumba also, same thing. How do we get to think about things holistically? And whoever is lobbying at the round table, if you're at the round table, lobby for all the sectors, because a city has to work in all aspects. And also Silas, amongst the practitioners, also planning needs to be comprehensive, completely comprehensive in every sense of it. Thank you.
I think let's start with Professor Yigal.
Well, the issue is comprehensiveness. Is how to create a comprehensive plan, a comprehensive development, and again, what we call the disjointed increments of planning is the enemy of development. We need always to keep in mind that all issues together have to be dealt at the same time, simultaneously. Otherwise, there is no chance to improve what's happening in the present. You have to deal with the people, with their needs. You have to look at the ecology. You have to look at the economy. You have to look at the housing. You have to, each one of the aspects in each level of planning should be comprehensive.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Irumba and Mr. Silas.
I fully agree with the observation on the suggestions made by Pamela on the need of holistic planning. The case of Wise is coming out strongly. We're improving the infrastructure in the Wise slum area. But what about people's livelihoods? Because one of the biggest challenges we have in the city is poverty levels. So you improve the infrastructure, now what next? Okay? So I agree with you fully that we need a holistic planning approach towards planning and development. Of course, I'm aware government is tackling both issues, physical infrastructure development, the socio-economic issues, including poverty. But the challenge is that the two don't move at the same speed. Okay? You find that the speed at which physical infrastructure development is moving is not at the same speed at which the other interventions, the socio-economic interventions, are being implemented by government. So one ends up lagging behind the other. And that lag is part of what causes confusion in the system of, implementing the various strategies by government. But in principle, I agree with you fully that we need a more comprehensive or holistic approach towards planning and development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rumba. Yeah, you mentioned a very important point. That's the whole essence of the discussion that we're having right now. That Wise has a population of about maybe at least over 5,000. Over 5,000. And it's also a commercial center. The biggest timber depot is Boise. If you move industrial, we have industrial area in Boise. It stretches all the way to Kalere. It's huge, but it's not formal. It's potholes and everything. It's a slum itself. And ever so often there are fires which come because people want to take over the land. So here's what I would do if I was to. I think we need another forum to be able to discuss this other aspect of implementation properly. Look at that ring road, about 3 kilometers from the city center, covered by swamp. Very valuable land. An acre is going for about R1 billion shillings. We're looking at Kamocha, Kifumbira area. Come, Boise, turn around. It's very expensive land. How about if we started with that? We are proposing a Boise Silicon City, self-contained, everything within. You don't need to come to town. I hardly come to town, by the way. Opposite the road, there's Centenary Bank. Down the building, there's Diamond Trust Bank. Across the road, there's KCC Division Headquarters. The other side, there's a market. Beautiful environment, beautiful. The neighbors, awesome. It's packed with, it's full of life. But if we ignore the local person, and we talk about development as just physical planning, there's a difference between physical planning and urban planning. In urban planning, we're talking about the relationship of the built environment with the population. So if we talk about physical planning, you're going to alienate the entire population. None of them will afford the buildings that you're going to build. In fact, unless you're going to build for them storied huts, you're going to have to displace them. So we have to think. We want to maintain the community. We want to keep these people there. And we want more people to come. We want engineers to come and settle in Boise. Boise is on the northern bypass, connected to Entebbe Airport by the Entebbe Expressway. 20 minutes from Entebbe Airport to Boise. During the lockdown, we drove in about 15 minutes. I was in Boise. I couldn't believe it. Awesome. Why can't we have this? So we have this idea of Boise Silicon City, 1 kilometer away from the Makerere University, the third biggest, best or biggest university in Africa. Industrial, Kawempe is also an industrial area. It is self-contained. So what we're thinking about is a transit to the city center. Within 3 minutes, you should be in the city center. I myself, I left Boise at 5 p.m. It took me an hour. We came together. We arrived at the same time. It took me an hour coming here. So think about it holistically, comprehensively, while considering the people also, the housing, then you'll actually see a magic development, a magic developing. That's when you see the Kampala that we aspire to. Something magical, something out of this world. But it is doable. The money is there. $1 billion is enough to build all the houses we need in Kampala if we borrowed it. And Ugandans will pay for it and return it back. So we need to sit down in another forum and discuss. I think this is the best forum that I've had personally. I've enjoyed it. I appreciate it. It's going to take us to another position. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for those remarks, Mr. Silas. We have, due to time, we have room for one more question from the audience. Then we really have to wrap up. So, a bit of competition. Who puts the hand up first? Feel free to come over here.
Good evening, everyone. My question goes to the doctor. I wanted to ask what measures are being taken, what is the matter of the local man, the KCCA? Matters of the local man of Kampala. Because one thing we have to accept all of us here as people from Kampala and Uganda, Ugandans are very stubborn people. We have to accept that, right? As designers, as architects and engineers. So I feel that before we go into these really great ideas, I really commend them. We should really go down and look at the local man, the border guy, as we said. Remember, they can't afford those 500 million apartments and all that. So if we can have measures that look at people's side, because we have to look at the cultures, right? But most people have the concept that culture is in the old days and the drumming of the instruments and all that, but culture is our way of life, right? So we have to look at how the local man of Uganda lives his daily life, from the lowest man to the upper side. So that's what happens. Thank you.
Okay. Your name?
Alba Jimmy Musinguzi.
Musinguzi. Thank you, Mr. Musinguzi, for thinking about the local man. It's good you substantiated, because the question I was having in my mind, what's the understanding of the local man? But when you added some attributes, then I understood the local man you are talking about. The border, the street vendor, the market attendant, Wino market, in the Waisa market. Okay? That's the local man. If you have noted, we learn along the way. Okay? In 2012, between 2012 and 2014, KCCA used to be, I could say, fairly aggressive on the local man. Okay? So we saw many street vendors leaving the street. There was a plan even to remove borders completely from the city. There was little consideration of the local man at that time. But the strategies have changed over time. And we have learned as an institution. Okay? So many of the programs we are implementing now, we have the local man at the back of our mind. For example, market vendors, you have seen a number of projects who have come up with to build modern markets in a number of places in the city. You have seen the Wandegea market. We're building one in Obsega. We're going to build one in Tintale. We acquired land and improved the Usafi market in Kisenyi area. So the whole strategy was to create working spaces for the local man. In terms of housing, we have been battling the issue of policing. because at some stage, I think it should have been 1992, there was a shift in terms of housing policy for housing provision by government being a direct provider of housing to government being an enabler of housing improvement. So which relegated government to the role of policy development, policy implementation, creating a conducive environment for the private sector to participate in housing development. But one lesson which is coming out clearly is that that has not solved the housing problem, particularly in providing low-cost housing or affordable housing to our population. So there are some programs we are coming up with. Others are about to mature, where we are entering into partnerships with the private sector to provide affordable housing, particularly in slum areas. You know, to come up with slum improvement programs focusing on housing for the poor. So there are a number of areas and interventions we're coming up with, largely targeting the urban poor. There are many examples I can give. Okay, we are promoting urban agriculture. Okay, all those are programs aimed at targeting the urban poor, the ones we are calling the local mind.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to invite Architect Felix Holland to do the closing remarks of this event and to thank our panelists and our speaker.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, our panelists, and thank you to our main speaker. Thank you to our audience here at the Square for joining us for this evening, and all of you at home via Zoom and via Facebook. It's been a really informative evening, certainly for me personally, and it is now my role to somehow wrap up this evening. And really, when I think about everything I've heard this evening, there are two very different ways that I could now conclude. One is a very pessimistic one, and one is a very optimistic one. On the negative side, you could say, we are in a situation where this country grows so fast and the population grows so fast that there is no way we are going to win this battle in the sense of planning, in the sense of infrastructure. We have seen all these unbelievable figures in Professor Yigal's presentation of a country that will more than double within just 20 years, an urbanization that has to reach 30 million by 2040 when we are currently at 3. Unbelievable figures there. We have also clearly discussed the issue of different plans that are in place that do not talk to each other, the lack of synchronization of plans. I remember that myself from my own professional experience, where I was once involved in a building that clashed with a future flyover project. And then when we talked to KCCA, only KCCA and JICA knew about it. When we talked to Ministry of Works, they had never heard about that flyover. So there's a complete lack of the different players actually talking to each other. And then of course, Dr. Irumba has mentioned it, there's no money anyway. We can have great plans and we can have wonderful designs, but we have anyway got no money to implement all that stuff. So this is all very, negative and very, very pessimistic in a way as an outlook. You could also look at it completely different. You could also look at it in a way that the presentation that Professor Yigal has made to us, which really did the national side as well as the city side. And in both cases, you could actually see that what they did there, they applied proper planning methodology to a problem. That is what planners do. That is what designers do. They look at the problem and then they try to come up with solutions. There's not much emotion in there. There's not much pessimism or destitution. It's just a problem that needs resolving. And I thought there's some great ideas there on both levels, on the national side, where we look at actually developing other cities, developing transport corridors, and developing bioregions, which I think is wonderful. And then on a cityscape, where we really look at satellite cities, where we look at mass transit, where we look at additional satellite cities that are currently not there, and trying to do it all in a very, well-considered way. We have also heard from Dr. Irumba, for instance, on the BRT system that I'm personally very passionate about. There's actually something happening. That is wonderful to hear. I can't wait to see even if it's just a small pilot project, to see something happening. And then we have heard from Silas, there is some Silicon Valley growing in Bryce, which we're all looking forward to, to seeing soon. So overall, I must say that us as designers and planners, and most of us in our forum are somehow in that bracket. I think we end up choosing the positive and the optimistic side, because that is our job. Our job is to see problems and solve them. And it's very, very difficult to solve problems with a pessimistic or a negative mindset. So I want to thank all the 3 contributors for everything they've contributed this evening. This forum, Localtalks, as a quarterly event, is really meant for anybody who is interested in the issue of green design in the broadest sense, sustainable design. It's a local event, but it's also through the internet. It's also regional. We know we have many participants from outside of Uganda, and we're very happy about that. And the last point I really want to make this evening is that this forum that we are trying to create here is not our forum. It is not our forum as Localworks. It's our forum. All of us, all contributors and all attendees of this event, please use this as an opportunity to talk to each other. And please do talk back to us. Give us feedback on whether you enjoyed it or ideas you have. Give us input in terms of future events. If there's anything that you are particularly passionate about that you would like to share with colleagues or friends or other professionals, Localtalks is your event, and I invite you to communicate to us via all these channels that we have, email and social media. And with those words, I would like to close the event for this evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing many of you again in December for our next event. Thank you so much.
May I add one sentence to the audience? One sentence, please. May I add?
Go ahead, please.
Yes, here in Israel, in this coming Saturday, we celebrate the New Year. It's the Jewish New Year. So I'm using this opportunity to wish you all the best and a very, very, very good year without Corona.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.